A human body that jumps out of an airplane at 10,000 feet falls at roughly 120 miles per hour. In freezing rain, in November, in a business suit and a pair of loafers, with no goggles and no helmet, the wind hits exposed skin like a wall of needles. Eyes freeze open. The lungs fight for breath in air that is half ice. If the parachute opens, you have 90 seconds to find a landing zone in the dark, in a thunderstorm, over a forest so dense that a man can vanish 6 feet from a road and never be found. If the parachute does not open, the impact at terminal velocity will liquefy the organs inside your ribcage before your skull touches the ground. The body, the parachute, the briefcase, the $200,000 in cash, none of it has ever been found. And the man who took the jump has no name, no fingerprints, no face that anyone alive can swear to. He bought his ticket with a $20 bill, gave the airline a name that turned out to be a Belgian comic book character, and stepped out of the back of a Boeing 727 into the night sky of Washington state on the evening of November 24, 1971. This is the most famous unsolved crime in American history. It has been investigated by the FBI for 55 years. It has produced one piece of physical evidence, a rotting bundle of cash dug up by an 8-year-old boy 9 years too late. Everything else is a question. Let me tell you what happened, or what the FBI thinks happened. The era. Before we begin, you have to understand the world this happened in. November 1971. Richard Nixon is in the White House. Vietnam is on every television. The Twin Towers are still being built, and American aviation is in the middle of an epidemic nobody today remembers. Between 1968 and 1972, there were more than 130 hijackings of American airliners, more than 2 a month. Most of them ended with the plane being flown to Cuba and the hijacker walking off into Havana. There were no metal detectors. There were no X-ray machines. There were no security checkpoints of any kind. You walked onto a plane the same way you walked onto a city bus. You paid in cash. You gave any name you wanted. Pilots were trained to comply with hijackers, fly where they were told, and let the FBI sort it out on the ground. The airlines, panicking at the rate of incidents, had started offering something almost unbelievable in retrospect: pay-and-jump deals. If a hijacker demanded money, the airline would simply hand it over, on the assumption that no one would actually try to jump out of an airplane in mid-flight. Until somebody finally did. The ticket. Portland International Airport. The afternoon before Thanksgiving, 1971. The terminal is half empty. A middle-aged man, mid-40s, 6 feet tall, olive complexion, dark hair slicked back, walks up to the Northwest Orient counter. Black raincoat, dark business suit, thin black tie, clip-on with a mother-of-pearl pin, loafers. Witnesses will later say he looked like an insurance salesman on his way to a funeral. He pays in cash, $20 one bill. He gives his name, Dan Cooper. Nobody asks for ID. In 1971, nobody asks anyone for ID. He buys a one-way ticket to Seattle, 30 minutes in the air. In a newspaper office that night, a reporter working from a bad phone connection will mishear the name. He will type the letters D and B. The error will spread to every paper in America before anyone catches it. The man's real chosen alias, Dan Cooper, is the name of a Belgian comic book hero. A fictional Royal Canadian Air Force test pilot who, in one issue, parachutes out of an aircraft mid-flight. Whoever this man is, he is making a private joke that no American investigator will catch for 30 years. The note. He boards flight 305. He takes seat 18C, the back row aisle. He orders a bourbon and 7-Up. He pays. He tips. He lights a cigarette. You could still do that in 1971. He hands a folded note to the flight attendant, Florence Schaffner. She drops it into her purse without reading it. She is 23 years old, and she has been on the job long enough to know when a man is trying to slip her his number, and she has no intention of calling him later. He leans across the aisle. His voice is very calm, very quiet. "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." She opens it. The handwriting is neat. The message is short. The briefcase he is holding contains a bomb. She is to sit beside him. She does. He opens the briefcase, just a crack, 8 red cylinders, wires, a large battery. She believes him completely. So would you. The demand. His voice never changes. $200,000. $20 bills, untraceable, 4 parachutes, 2 main, 2 reserve, a fuel truck waiting in Seattle, and no funny business. The captain radios down, the FBI scrambles. The president of Northwest Orient personally authorizes the ransom. The plane circles Seattle for 2 hours. Inside the cabin, Cooper is, by every account, almost weirdly polite. He pays for his second drink. He offers Florence a tip and she refuses. He makes small talk. He points out the lights of Tacoma below. He tells her not to be afraid. She will later say, and this is a direct quote, "He was rather nice. He was thoughtful. He was never cruel." The trick. The plane lands at SeaTac at 5:39 p.m. A man in a windbreaker walks up the stairs and hands over a canvas bag. $200,000, 10,000 bills, 21 pounds of cash. The parachutes are loaded onto the plane. Cooper inspects them one by one. And this is the moment the FBI realizes who they are dealing with. The Bureau had quietly considered slipping him a sabotaged parachute, a chute that would never open. They decided against it for one reason. Cooper had asked for 4, not 1, not 2, 4. The FBI assumed correctly that he was hinting he might take a hostage with him, a stewardess, strapped to his chest. If he was going to make her jump too, they could not risk handing him a dud. So they handed over 4 real parachutes. Days later, they understood. He never intended to take a hostage. He asked for 4 parachutes so the FBI would not dare sabotage any of them. He had played out their countermove in his head before they had thought of it. He was a step ahead before the plane had even taken off. The storm. He lets all 36 passengers walk off the plane. Smiling, alive, most of them never even knew there was a hijacking. He keeps the crew, 4 people. He gives the pilots a new set of instructions. They are oddly precise. Fly south, toward Mexico City, altitude no higher than 10,000 feet. Cabin unpressurized, flaps down 15 degrees. Landing gear extended. Airspeed no more than 200 miles per hour. He is asking, in other words, for the precise, narrow flight envelope that lets a human being open the rear stairs of a 727 in mid-flight without being torn apart by the wind. This is not the request of a man who is improvising. This is the request of someone who has read the aircraft manual cover to cover. The 727 takes off again at 7:40 p.m. into a thunderstorm, rain, freezing temperatures, 0 visibility below. Cooper orders Florence and the rest of the crew into the cockpit and tells them to close the door behind them and not come out under any circumstances. He stays in the cabin. Alone. The pilots can hear him moving around for a few minutes through the intercom. Then they ask if he needs help with anything. He answers, no. Those are the last words anyone will ever hear from D.B. Cooper. The step. At approximately 8:13 p.m., the pilots feel a sudden pressure change. The tail dips slightly, then levels. The rear stairs have just been deployed in flight. Somewhere over the black pine forests of southwestern Washington, they will never know exactly where, a man in a business suit and dress shoes, with 21 pounds of cash tied to his waist and a parachute on his back, stepped out the back of a flying jetliner into a freezing storm at 10,000 feet. The ground. Now think about what is waiting for him below. The drop zone is the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. 5,000 square kilometers of Douglas fir and western hemlock, some of the trees 200 feet tall, branches spaced just close enough that a falling body will hit 4 or 5 of them on the way down. The canopy is so dense that satellite imagery, even today, cannot see the ground in most of it. The terrain underneath is ravines, scree slopes, and freezing creeks that don't appear on any map. Every year, the Forest Service quietly logs hikers who walk off marked trails and are never seen again. Some of them are recovered years later, as scattered bones under moss. Most of them are not recovered at all. This is the forest that is supposed to catch him. He is not a paratrooper. The military, after the Second World War, kept very careful records of what a night jump in foul weather does to a trained soldier in full gear. Compound fractures of the femur, where the bone comes through the skin. Hips driven up into the pelvis on landing. Spines compressed into a permanent curve. Faces opened on rocks the jumper never saw coming. The Allied paratroopers who dropped into Normandy in June of 1944 lost between 15 and 20% of their men in the first 2 minutes, before a single German fired a shot. Hedgerows. flooded fields, trees. Cooper is jumping into worse weather, into worse terrain, in worse clothing, with no training the FBI has ever been able to verify. If he survives the trees, if his chute snags in a high branch and lowers him, by luck, into a clearing, he is now standing in a freezing forest at night, in a soaked business suit, with a broken ankle or worse, with 21 pounds of useless paper money strapped to his waist, 20 miles from the nearest road, in a storm. The temperature on the ground that night, the National Weather Service later confirmed, dropped below freezing within an hour. A man in wet clothes, immobilized, would be in hypothermic collapse before sunrise. This is what the FBI thinks happened. Not a clean escape. A body, alive for some unknown number of hours, alone in the dark, in pain, listening to the rain hit the canopy above it. And then, sometime before dawn, no longer listening to anything. That is one version. The plane lands in Reno, Nevada. The stairs are still hanging open. The cabin is empty. 2 of the 4 parachutes are gone. The bomb, the briefcase, the clip-on tie with the mother-of-pearl pin, all left on his seat. Folded. Neat. As if he had set them down on a desk on his way out of an office, never planning to come back. The largest manhunt in FBI history begins that night. They call it NORJAK. Hundreds of agents flood the Gifford Pinchot. Helicopters with thermal imaging. Submarines in Lake Merwin, dogs in the brush. Volunteers walking shoulder to shoulder for weeks. Every parachute manufacturer in the country, every skydiver, every Air Force veteran, every Boeing employee with access to a 727 manual interviewed. They find nothing. Not a shoe, not a tie clip. Not a single $20 bill. The forest, somehow, has swallowed him whole. For 9 years, the trail is dead. The boy. February 10, 1980. A family is having a picnic on a sandbar along the Columbia River, a place called Tina Bar. Their 8-year-old son, Brian Ingram, is digging a flat spot in the sand to build a campfire. His small hands scrape away the top layer of silt, and his fingers close around something soft and rotten. He pulls it out, a bundle of cash. $20 bills, mildewed, still wrapped in their original rubber band. He digs again. Another bundle. Then another. $5,800 in 20s buried in a riverbank in the middle of nowhere. His father calls the police. The police call the FBI. The FBI checks the serial numbers against a list they have been keeping for 9 years. Every single bill matches. But the money is in the wrong place. The FBI's drift calculations from the night of the jump put Cooper's landing zone 40 miles east of Tina Bar in the Cascade foothills. The river does not flow from that landing zone to that sandbar. The bills are stacked too neatly to have washed up. The rubber bands should have rotted away in months in wet sand. Instead, they are intact, almost a decade later. And the rest of the money, $194,000 in marked 20s, is simply nowhere. Not deposited at any bank. Not spent at any gas station. Not pawned. Not laundered. Not found by any hiker, fisherman, hunter, or child anywhere on Earth in 50 years. The suspects. They pile up across the decades, each one more plausible and more impossible than the last. Kenneth Christiansen, a Northwest Airlines flight attendant, a WWII paratrooper. He quietly buys a house in cash a year after the hijacking. On his deathbed in 1994, he tells his brother, "There is something you should know about me, but I cannot tell you." He dies before finishing the sentence. His brother spends the rest of his life convinced. Sheridan Peterson, a Boeing technical writer. In his day job, he had literally helped write the manual for the 727, including the procedures for operating the aft stairway in flight. A trained skydiver. A former CIA contractor in Vietnam. A survival expert. He laughed off the accusations for 50 years and died in 2021, taking whatever he knew with him. In 2016, after 45 years of dead ends, the FBI officially suspended the case. They had Cooper's tie. They had partial DNA on the tie, but no match in any database. They had unusual particles on the tie. Titanium. Rare earth metals. Traces of cerium and strontium sulfide. Chemicals that in 1971 were used in only a handful of factories in the entire United States. Places like Boeing's own supersonic transport project. Places where employees would have had clearance, training, and a reason to handle that exact metallurgy on a daily basis. The FBI noted this. Then they closed the file. The truth. Everything I just told you is real. The note, the bourbon, the parachute trick, the titanium on the tie. Florence Schaffner is still alive and has retold the story for 55 years without changing a single detail. The only thing about this case that is not real is the ending, because the story does not have one. The FBI quietly believes he died on impact. The skydivers who have studied the math, wind speed, drop angle, terminal velocity, the survival rates of paratroopers who landed in similar terrain, most of them think he lived. Both versions are physically possible. Neither has any evidence behind it. A man stepped off the back of an airplane, and the sky closed up behind him. The question asterisk. So here is the question. Somewhere in this country, if the skydivers are right, there is an old man in his 80s or 90s now who knows exactly what happened. He has spent 55 years pretending not to. He has watched documentaries about himself. He has heard his face described on the evening news. He has read his own obituary written for half a dozen other men. He has paid for his coffee every morning with a $20 bill because that is the one bill no one will ever check. Or, somewhere in a forest in southwestern Washington, 12 feet under the pine needles, in a stretch of trees the FBI walked past 3 separate times, there is a skeleton in the rotting remains of a black raincoat. A wad of decomposed 20s beside the ribs. A parachute still tangled in the branches above. And it has been there since Thanksgiving night, 1971, waiting for someone to look in the 1 square mile of forest nobody has thought to look at yet. One of those two things is true. If you had to put your life on it, which one would you choose? Drop your answer below, because after 55 years, yours is as good as the FBI's.